Hello everybody, welcome back. This is BBFL Competitive Balance 11, the 11th edition for the 11th year of the season. I'm just kind of riffing on this one. I know what I want to go over, but I'm not scripted on this one, so there might be some pauses. That kind of shit. Let's hop into it. 2022 season, regular season competitive balance. On the left here, you're going to see our wins by manager. Nick, of course, at the top with 10 wins. This is organized by, I'm gesturing to the screen as if you can see it. These are organized by total number of wins. So this is a little different from you might see in the final standings in ESPN. This is just purely by win and then, calculated win percentage and each manager's average margin of victory, which is calculated. Elsewhere, that is just, actually we can go to that right now. That is 2018. That is the value taken from the net points that a manager scored this year, which is the number of points they scored minus the number of points their opponent scored total. So Nick here ended up with net positive, while someone like Ian ended up just under negative, so it was a lot of really close games, or got blown out a couple times and really blew someone out a couple times. Data doesn't really show that, but you can go through and look through everything. I don't think you guys really care. So that's what average MOV is. That's the average number of points your team either won or lost by this year. Taking a look at our win percentage analysis, our standard deviation was a 2.3. Ideally, you'd be around a 1.8, and standard deviation, again, is just if you ran the simulation a million times. Ideally, everything would come out roughly even. In this case, everybody would go 7 and 7, or 7 and 7. That's what that value means, the 1.870. It's the number of wins over the square root of the number of games. So that number really is only valuable in comparison to, well, actually, the actual standard deviation is only valuable in comparison to the idealized. The further away from the further above, I should say, the ideal standard deviation, the further apart our teams were this year in terms of balance in wins and losses. So, not one of the worst we've ever seen. Pretty comparable to last season, because we had a 10-win team, a few 9-win teams, with an 8-win team, a couple 7s, a couple 6s, and we had a couple teams all the way down in the dungeon of 4 and 2. So the haves had a lot, and the have-nots didn't have much at all. Our NSC, which is the non-Scully competitive balance measure, was a 1.24 this year, an uptake from last year. And of course, this is just another way to measure parity in a league. You can read along the side there. A 1.0 would be perfectly balanced in terms of win-loss. And this is just, it's another way to visualize the standard deviation. The further above a 1, the further apart the most winningest teams and the most losingest teams were. We had an 8-point gap between first and last place in the league this year, versus that's an 8-win gap in 2021 versus a 6-win gap in 2020. 2019 is the one I always go back to, which is 0.97, because there was only 6 games in between the top and the bottom, but even then, all of these teams were still only within like 3 to 4 wins from each other. That's our NSC. A little high this year, but this was also a really weird year for scoring and everything. The average margin of victory we saw between, that's not right. The average number, the average margin of victory was, I actually did not put that. Let me see this really quick. Real close this year. I mean, we had a lot of very tight games, so we can come back to that later. Um, standard deviation there is about 11.9, and that value is useful at looking at comparing your margin of victory for a manager versus the actual standard deviation. Ideally, standard deviation would be 0, which means all the teams tied, so everybody was perfectly balanced. But um, a single standard deviation would be about 11.9 points, which means you're within about, I think it's 50 or 60% of the mean for the average, um, margin of victory across the league. And we take a look at Nick. He was right in there with it, like just under, the average margin of victory. James was well below it. He was in some nail biters the entire season, while I was winning by an average of 15 points. I was above that. While we see someone like Tuck, who was what is that? That's 2.5 standard deviations outside the mean, away from the mean. So he was losing much worse than the rest of the league was winning or losing. That's another way to look at that. Let's see. Anything else in point differential? Net points, average points. This is the average point differential standard deviation for this value. I don't think I explained this very well in years past. This is this manager's standard deviation from the average margin of victory for teams this year. So Nick was right there on the money. James is well below it, which means his data clusters were much, much, much tighter to an average, league average, which again would be 0 points for the standard deviation of margin of victory. James is well over that. Oh, this has buff here. I think I looked at Wild earlier. Yeah, you can look through these. Kayla is right on the money there. Stu is right on the money. Kelsey was right there on the money. Just very unfortunate. Tuck over 2 standard deviations outside the norm. This is a chart I brought out last year. More just an eyeball. I looked at everybody's records at the after week 4, which is about a quarter of the way through. Just to see if there's any early standouts and then some early sleepers and just see how they finished out. And then in the gold or in the red is just kind of my eyeball. Like, I gave it to James 2 years in a row. I realized that, and 2 years in a row, he started out 2-2. Things looked rocky. Finished out 8-2, and also didn't make it to the Benny Bowl in both of those years from the looks of it. Versus I gave it to Stu this year, who started off 2-2 and ended up with a 4-6 slide. Actually, wait, what am I doing? This should definitely be Kayla, because she started off 0-4 and finished 6-4. I mean, sure, she still lost 4 games down the stretch, but she picked up 6 additional versus, I mean, that's an eyeball thing. I'll let you guys figure that out as we go. We're going to jump the competitive balance to playoffs before I introduce all our new stats that you saw there. It's a little teaser. The 2022 playoffs, this is much less based on math and more of stuff I've made up. On the very leftmost column, you'll see the seed as is depicted on ESPN. This is after, of course, James does the realignment. So this should match up with the official BBFL bracket. And then, excuse me, this beer. I'm so sorry. Our seed finish is where that seed finished, obviously. So Nick was 1 seed. He won, so he got first place. Chase was our 6th seed. He got 2nd, so he finished there. And then from there, I took the semifinalists, and whoever scored the most points got 3rd and then 4th. And then for our first rounders, I took their highest score and placed them there. That's just how I like to run this. Seed differential is I just have this minus that. So the closer to 0 you are, the more typical you would have expected someone to finish, because you expect the 1 seed to go all the way just by virtue of math and brackets. So if you have a lower number, a negative number, then you finished well under your projected finish in just my eyes. A higher number, a positive number, the more positive it is, the further you exceeded. EAV is definitely some crazy bullshit math that we've come up with a couple years ago. It stands for Ethy's Anarchy Value, and it's just a way to reflect in one number what's going on here every year. It is with 0 being total non-anarchy, which would be the 1 seed won, the 2 seed was second, the 3rd seed was third, the 4th seed was fourth, all the way down. There's the math on the side, and it's normalized on a scale of 0 to 1. So 0 would be totally non-anarchy, a 1 would be total anarchy. That's just how I keep pointing at the camera, or the computer as if you can see it. That's how we just take these values and put them into one number that you can look at and understand. EAV history is how this year's playoffs compares to every other playoff in terms of EAV. Again, normalized on a scale of 1 to 0. So the least anarchistic playoff of all time is the 0. And the craziest one ever would be a 1. We've never had a 0 or a 1 so far. This year we came in at a 0.55, so right around the middle on anarchy. We saw in 2021 last year we had a 0.89 because the 1 seed got knocked out right away and had the lowest score. The 5 seed won, the 4 seed took second, the 3rd seed took 7th, the 7th seed took 6th, the 8th went 4th. All kind of crazy shit. EAV of 7.75. So EAV max we have still is 0.81. That was all the way back in 2016, where the 8 seed won it. The 3 seed took second, and the 7th seed took third. The 4th seed took fourth. Pretty crazy. So yeah, EAV history of 1. 2014 was the most boringest with 0 there. And then NSC is a loosely adapted over of the same thing for NSC in the regular season. It's the higher above 1, the further apart than expected the results were. Anything below 0 is closer in results than expected, much closer to total parity. And now we get into the juicy stuff. This is something else I've totally kind of ripped off to come up with, and I'm calling this the Ethy's Playoff Push stat. Pro Football Reference and Sports Reference in general, it's I discovered a stat recently called the Simple Rating System. It's the way they describe it is, quote, so every team's rating is their average point margin, adjusted up or down depending on the strength of their opponents. Essentially, it's a recursive matrix that, probably matrices, that analyzes a team's performance and against their opponent's strength run thousands of times. And the crazy thing is that you can't calculate, like, for example, I couldn't calculate James's SRS without also calculating everyone else's SRS, but I have to calculate everyone else's SRS with James's SRS, and it's this crazy recursive matrix thing that none of us remember from high school math. I know I certainly fucking don't. So you kind of have to just plug in a value and run it, and then run it, take the adjusted value, run it again, you run it. That's when the recursive comes in. You run it thousands of times until the numbers stabilize. I've kind of bypassed that. The Ethy's Playoff Push, the EPP, is calculated as the sum of a team's average point differential and the strength of schedule value, which I've also taken to calculating myself, which is a whole fucking thing. It's the higher the EPP, essentially the easier time a team had making their way through the season, the less resistance they encountered. You could also kind of look at it as team performance and luck combined, because a lot of it's out of your control, a lot of it's in your control. Some of it is being a good manager and putting in people with good matchups, and it's also you have a guy pop off out of nowhere, or your team, your opponent is mismanaging their team, or they're players pop off. Man, this beer is really getting to me. I'm sorry. Um, SOS calculated as I originally just took the your opponent's average points per game that I got from ESPN and then from calculating myself for this year because we're still waiting on those results because of the whole week 17 thing. Um, and I just kind of returned like a random number. So I wanted it to have a little bit of a spread so it's easier to read between it was between like the strongest SOS was 65 and the weakest was like a 68. So uh, I doubled your points, your opponent's average points per game, and I divided by 3 just for shits and gigs. That is the SOS value. That's strength of schedule. And then the EPP is just the sum of your margin of victory versus your SOS, which is all calculated from this. And it's a new value I've come up with, and I have run it back through 2018, which is how far back I've done the margin of victory data. Um, I'm going to get to the others eventually, but just to kind of give you a rundown of how it looks in 2020. James had the highest EPP with a 94.88. He has a significant jump up from Sam. This graph is normalized by, it's organized by EPP from highest to lowest, and we're going to look at this graph, then we'll look at the other one because it has a different shading, just to explain my madness here. James, EPP of 94.88, highest in the league. And you could read that as he won his games by an average of 15 points per game, which was above the standard deviation, above the league average of margin of victory. His strength of schedule was on the higher side, but you can also look at it as another value of note is the average points per game just across the league was 117.4. Our scoring was actually a lot lower than it has been in the last few years. This was another weird season for us. It kind of plays into that narrative that this was just a really bad year of NFL football. I don't know enough if that's really true, but anyway, if we keep in mind the average points per game scored in the league, you'll see that James was scoring well above the league average, while his opponents were scoring just a little above average. The standard deviation value we see down here, I just pointed at my screen again. This value is just the standard deviation of the points allowed per game for this column. So one standard deviation, within one standard deviation, meaning your points for per game is within 5.5 points of the league average. That'd be less than one standard deviation. If you're scoring anywhere from 112 points per game, or averaging, 112 points per game to 122 points per game, you're about a standard deviation outside of those numbers. You're one standard deviation away. You're a full unit of measurement away from the mean. And then if you were lower than 107 points per game or above 127 points per game, you're 2 standard deviations away. I could have made a chart for that, but I mean, you don't need to know exactly. You can eyeball it with this and this. So let's look at a big drop down to Sam here with he was scoring 123 points per game, just one standard deviation above the average, while his opponents were scoring 114 points per game. So they were really close to the league average, and there's such a big difference there because James was scoring 11 more points per game than Sam was. But even though their opponents' average points were still pretty similar. Kayla's very close in the same thing. She was scoring a little more than Sam, but her opponents were also scoring more. So even though she was scoring slightly more than her opponent than Sam was, I was just like, wait, that's his name, right? even though she was scoring just a little more than he was, her opponents were scoring way above the league average every week. So she had a much that made it harder for her. Am I explaining this right? Yeah. Higher AP, yeah, the user time out. And these are all pretty close for a while. Let's jump down the chase here. Who he won his games an average of like it was nail biters, like single digits across his time this season. He was scoring an average of 116 points per game, which is essentially the league average, and his opponents were also just under that by 0.2. So they are essentially scoring the same amount every week. Kelsey was in that same boat too. Then we look here, we see Ian scoring just under league average per week, while his opponents were right at the league average. So he is a bit of a disadvantage there. Still pretty right in the middle. We get down to Bryce here, who is scoring not even like just over standard deviation away from the league average, while his opponents were right there next to it. And then we get down to some painful looks where Makita was scoring two standard deviations away from the mean versus his opponents who were scoring right at the mean. And then Tuck, who just, I guess, couldn't get it together this year, unfortunately. 94, that is 107, 97, like 2.5 standard deviations away from the mean in terms of average points scored. Not only that, his opponents were scoring above average that year. To look through 2021 had who had the really fun ones? Like this. Here's a perfect example of the haves and the have-nots. Going back to James, 2019, EPP of a 103, second only, actually third highest. He was winning his games by an average of 24 points per game. He was scoring an average of 143 points per game, which was a whole 23 points above the league average, while his opponents were scoring technically under the league average there. Then we jump all the way down to Ian here, who was scoring 130 points per game, which was just over standard deviation away from the mean, but his opponents were also scoring almost a full standard deviation above the mean of an average point per game of 120.9. Go on down to look at King here. He was just above the average at 121, but his opponents were just about a standard deviation below their scoring. Looking at the likes of me and Kelsey, we had virtually identical seasons from this data at least. We were scoring just under the league average, and our opponents were scoring much further under the league average than us, which really bolstered our chances. And let's jump down here to Bryce and Makita. You'll see that Makita actually scored more points per game than Bryce this year, but his opponents were just fucking shredding him with going over over so much higher than average points per game than Bryce was, who was there. His opponents were on average still well below the average. So that's how that works. I'm pretty happy with how that works. There's a much bigger with the math explanation here if you want to look at it later. And I've transferred that data over to here, again, organized by EPP. And then just the darker the color, the further it was. So you'll see here, I mean, this is all kind of the same because the values are still pretty close to each other. That should not be bold. And you see minus 27 and plus 15. Clearly statistical outliers. And so when you get down to the red here, you're really far out. Much above. That goes down through, again, the 2018 season. These I plan on filling these out eventually. So that is the competitive balance. The regular season average win percentage is still at 0.496%. So we're still hovering basically at 500. The actual standard deviation, that is actually for the number of wins. And I gotta remember how to explain that. Honestly, oh wait, no, yeah. I got this. Yeah. So overall, the entire league, win percentage standard deviation is 2.3, which is above the 1.8, but only by about 0.5. So we're not really that far above the haves versus the have-nots. We're a lot closer than I would expect it after 11 years of fantasy football. Like, especially the last 7-8 years, we'll see when we get to the graphs in a minute, like how everything's tightening up. And I'd give us our league overall is a 1.275 on the NSC. So we're inching down there. I believe that we had a tick down from last year, though actually this was higher, so I don't remember. So we're still a little more unbalanced than statistically average than you would expect, all things equal. But that's just kind of how things work. Let me switch over now to... Man, I hope this doesn't crash in the middle. Graphs. Da-da-da. All right. This is my favorite shit. This graph, for the uninitiated, is regular season scoring over time. This is just your total points for the year plotted, with, the highs and the lows. I need to adjust that so that we can actually show that. Let's do that now live. A look behind the magic. What was that? That was 2172. Yeah, so we'll make that lag. Please don't crash. Got it. All right, there we go. Stu is not off the chart now. That's Stu. Yeah, fuck it, whatever. So you can see our whole average as we go. This thick gray line is the league average. Graphical error there. All right, fix. We're gonna switch over and then back. Better. And you can, like I was saying, you can see that as we go, we had a lot of space out, but we've really started to just clusterfuck around here. A little wider out this year than we were last year, but to take us in a little bit, to focus on this year. These dots will represent 2022. This is 2021. Let's see. This line here is 1800. So Wild 1882. Kayla's first number 1781. Her initiation. 1781, 1722, 1685. I'm right under that. These two, 1623. 3 people there. And I'm going to put all these graphs available. And down below the average, there's Tuck once again. Tuck, finally above the average, back below. I believe he'll be back next year. Here's your win-loss record over time. This is just literally your win percentage for the year, charted in a line. So really leveling out here at just below 500. Let's take us in for a closer look. See where you're at. This is the 700 mark. Still never gotten above that 10-win season here. This is I think a 10-win season. I don't fucking remember. There's where our teams ended up this year. This furthest point to the right is your 2022 finish. Here's my favorite chart of all time. Above, below 500, all-time manager. The way this one works is if you win, you get a bump up. You lose, you go down. So everybody starts at 0 here. And then as you travel, you try and stay above this black line. If you see an extra long branch, like meh, that means that's a missed playoff. That's your final game of the season versus the first game of this season. And a yellow dot with a black outline is a championship. These lines go up in increments of, looks like 5 and then 10. That's really weird. I don't know why it does that. You can see in this darker blue here, or this lighter blue is Chase. We're going to zoom in a sec. I'm in the purple, kind of hidden back here. Stu's in the green. James is up here in red. Still maintaining dominance there. Dark purple here is Ian. Kelsey in this lovely lime green. Nick in this off orange. Tucked away in there. Bakita in the beautiful pink. Bryce in his kind of maroonish. Sam in this kind of cream pale. I don't know. And Kayla here for the first time. Starts her journey here in this teal. And the indomitable Tuck in this gray. I should switch that to a nicer color. I think he deserves. Maybe I'll put him in white there when I adjust it next time. Let's zoom in a little bit. Well, actually, while we're looking at this big graph, let's see. So let's start with Chase. Chase got above 500 in week 8 of 2012, and it looks like he has never dropped under 500 since then. He dropped to 500 here at 0.164, which is we're gonna move this for a second over here. No, that's not right. Bear with me, please. Chase 164. Where's Chase? Value 164 for Chase would be week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Week 10 of the 2021 season, he hit 500. And he is not dipped below since. He almost went under again this year, but he's still on it. Looking at me, I went under right away early, and then I was above 500 for years and years and years, flirted with it again until I won my second BBFL championship. And then I ducked under around here. That's Kelsey's win, so that's in the 2020 season, been just hovering around there for a while. Stu emerged from the 500 dungeon at 0.43, which is 43 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Week 8 of the 2014 season, and he never looked back. He's never even been close to that, so props to him. James was at a -1 below 500 at 0.35, which is looks like it must be this. What was I looking at, James? 36, he returned to 0. So, in the final game of the 2013 season, James is 1 below 500. First game, he was under. No, he was 2 under, he was 1 under. Week 2 of 2014, James broke even, and he never looked back either. He has been climbing and climbing and climbing. Ian, let's see, where's Ian? Where does Ian start? He's only back here. Ian's gone up and down. He hasn't been under since right before he won his first championship. And he's getting a little close this year, but he's still pretty good. I'm getting tired. Kelsey has never been under. She was one above here, but she's never been even, aside from when she had 0 wins and 0 losses all time. Props to her. Where's Nick? Nick starts here. Spent the first couple of years above. Flirted with it here at 500. It dropped below in the 2020 season, but he's climbed that back out with some awesome win streaks right here. And he's our current champion. Makita, very in love with this line and has dipped under since 0.101, which was the end of the 2017 season, which is, again, when, as you saw from our doc, when the floor fell out. Bryce has, interestingly, never been above 500. He's been real close a couple times here, and here he was 1 under, but he's never made it. Sam, similar story, but he's able to breach here in the beginning of the 2021 season, and he hasn't been back under yet. Kayla has only played 14 games, but is... actually, no. Did she win her playoff game? She's here, which means she lost it, because then that would be the semi, and this would be the championship. So she made the playoffs and lost that, so she ticked back down there. And as we see, this is the long story of Tuck. I wanted to, like I said, we're going to zoom in here. This is really just fucking rambly video. And again, I'm going to make these available for download. See James all the way up here. High point at 34 games above 500. Ending at 33. Here's where you all stand in higher definition. Here's Tuck down here. And no offense to Tuck, but I made a graph here without that statistical outlier. Love the man, but here's what we look like, a little more defined, without being so spread out. It's a little easier picture to make. You can see better when people's runs begin. Let's take a zoom. Here's about how far apart everybody is. We got the great clusterfuck here in the middle at about right around 5 above 500. I'm flirting with 2 above. Chase is 4 above. Nick's 5 above. Ian 6 above. Sam and Kelsey are 8 above. Kayla -3. Bryce -8. Let's do that 20 up there. And Makita is now at the bottom of the pack here, purely for graphical needs. Let's move on to our next one. Oh shit, I didn't even finish this. Not this one, I'm looking later. Point differential. Just in yellow is the winner, in green is the loser of the mini bowl. We already know the final score for Bryce. Still waiting to see the final score for Nick, with the unfortunate situation going on with that player in his life in the balance. When that's updated, we'll have that. I will update these graphs before I upload the video, if I can still update that. This was a fun one to make a couple years ago. Was just, I wanted to plot the number of moves made in a season, transactions and trades, against the final standing of that manager. So whoever finishes in first place, second place, third place, fourth place, they've been averaging around 25 moves per year. And then we get this trough here with the people that finish 5th through 10th, where they are making significantly fewer moves over the course of the season. And you got the towers over here, where are making even more than this, which I think, I have no data to back this up, but I think is when you get down to the 11 and 12, you're dealing a lot with injuries and replacements and IR not stashes, but a key player going down and having to trade around for pick someone up. Over here in this brightly colored graph is the average number of moves, which you'll see in pink, the final standing, which you see in blue, and the number of championships won by the manager, seen in gray. So this is organized by manager. That is probably Seth's data, but I haven't updated it for Kayla. I just kind of replaced him and put Kayla's stats in there. And this is organized. How did I organize this? I think it was just in order of whoever won that year when I made it. So you see the average final standing really doesn't have any bearing on how many moves they've made, though we get a little outlier here and here to how far down they're finishing versus number of moves. Championships doesn't really apply. This one, wait, did I update this? I don't think I updated this. Hold on, let me check. I feel like I didn't. Oh yeah, I did. I'm dumb. I'm a dumb. Yeah, this is up to date. I'm sorry. This is all fully up to date data. So this is what we're seeing here. Ignore that, please. That is for work. The job of a coach never stops. This was something that I think James suggested when I first made the average number of moves versus final standing. He said it'd be interesting to look at the data of overall in the league versus last 6 years. I extended that to the last 7 years because I think that's when we've really hit our stride. These numbers are higher for average number of moves against the final standing of the manager on average. This is the number of moves, the final standing of the manager. This trough, still pretty much the same thing. Like, those numbers are very similar, almost identical. And we got the Twin Towers back here again, which I think, again, is injuries and freak accidents, that kind of thing. And then here we go with this data again, but only over the last 7 years. So that wasn't updated for Nick, though. I gotta... Where did I put that? I think I just had to enter that data manually. Sorry, distracted. Yeah, James averages the most moves per year by far. Then we got the mid to high 20s with Nick, Bryce, Kelsey, Makita, Stu, and Chase. And then lower numbers down here. Play more conservatively. I'm definitely in that number. That is all the graphs we have for today. We have one more item on our agenda, which is the playoff statistics. Now updated through 2022. This is always live on my Google Drive, so you can look at this anytime. I've updated the stylizing a little bit this year. If there is a seed that's never made it to a Benny Bowl or won the Benny Bowl, it's highlighted in red. So the same thing as last year. Whoever is the most recent entry here is highlighted with pink text. This year's champion, this year's runner-up, and our 2 semifinalists. Interestingly, what am I looking at? 2018. Chase, I had some stat here where Chase made it to the Benny Bowl twice and ended up losing it twice, unfortunately, after he won it here in 2013. I had something for that. I don't remember. So the 4 seed, the 6 seed, and the 7 seed have still never won the Benny Bowl. They are collectively 0-6 at the Benny Bowl, which is impressive out of 11 Benny Bowls. A third Benny Bowl runner-up in for the 6th seed in history. They are now the most only always a bridesmaid of the league, if you could call it that. Over here we have seed versus seed. The easiest way to read it is to find the seed you're looking for and look for the seed you want them to see against. So the 1 seed is 6 and 5 against the 8, so they've won 6 games against them and they've lost 5. If I was looking for the 8, I'd see that they're 5 and 6 against them. So that's their matchup versus every other matchup ever in playoff history. The red indicate matchups we've never seen before, a missing Seedagami, if you will. And the black is impossible because that's the 8 versus the 8, the 7 versus 7, 6 versus 6. We had a shakeup over here. First place in most my playoff ranking, just the best playoff record, is the 1 seed who's up to 15 and 7 all time. I should put a win percentage here. Second place is the 2 seed, not shockingly, with a 13 and 9 record. And the 5 seed has actually catapulted to number 3 with 11 and 8 record. That used to belong here to the 8 seed last year, and I think the year before that. They just overtook them this year with some good wins by the 5 seed Ian here. Fourth most wins goes to the 8 seed. Number 5 against the 3 seed at the 10 and 10 record. I gave them over that with the 10 and 10 versus the 10 and 9. 6 is the 6th seed with 8 and 11. 7 is the 7th seed with 5 and 11. And 8th is actually the 4 seed who is 5 and 12 all time in the playoffs, which is crazy. I mean, they have never won the Beating Bowl. They've been to it once last year, and they've made the semi 4 times outside of that. So that's pretty incredible. Looking at, I updated some of this. You'll see red. You guys are gonna get mad. I didn't say redacted, but semifinal there, Benny Bowl appearance there, 2 semifinals there, semifinal there. That's who those abbreviations denote. First round stats: the 1 is 6 and 5 against the 8. The 2 is 8 and 2 against the 7. The 3 is 5 and 3 against the 6. The 4 is 3 and 4 against the 5. The 5 is 4 and 3 against the 4. The 6 is 2 and 3 against you guys can see that. None of this has changed. This I added this year. The 4, 6, and 7 have never won the Benny Bowl, but the 5 has never lost the Benny Bowl. If you're a 5 and you make it, you win. No other seed can say that. Best performances, best low stats. I haven't updated that. I didn't really see any need to. Haven't seen anything crazy there. Playoff seed, Benny Bowl win-loss. Here's the seeds. This is the playoff seeded team, their record in the Benny Bowl. So the 1 seed has been 5 times. They've won 4, they lost 1. The 2 seed has been 3 times. They won 2, they lost 1. The 8 seed has been 3 times. They won 2, they lost 1. The vaunted board of champions, Stu still sits atop with 3 championships. James and I still have our 2, respectively. And then Nicholas Holmes joins the gang of single Benny Bowl championships so far. Down here is appeared but never won. In bolded in red are former BBFL managers. I felt we should still include them there, but because they're still part of these stats. But you know, they're down there. Still waiting for these guys to make it. These guys to win. This is one I got to work on. I took the regular season champion here, the Benny Bowl champion here, and where the regular season champion finished, to see how they do, who the winner is, and who made it, and where the regular season champion finished. And I think that's it. I was excited to cover my new EPP measuring device. I was pretty excited when I was able to create that. Take some time, look at it. I think it's informative. Is it amazing? No. Is it fun? Yeah. it kind of helps you contextualize some of the skill versus the luck that comes in fantasy management. This one I forgot to change the colors on. I kind of like that it's all different shades as you go. Like this one's clearly an outlier at 103, and this one's clearly way down there with this light blue. This is all I just get rid of the color there. Nobody really cares about that. And such a bold red here versus a faded red here. 129 so far above that. Yeah. To finish out, like I send my emails to our families. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out any time. You know how to find me on the chat. If you haven't watched it already, I recommend watching the Benny Boob Sports Network Films presents the Benny Bowl 9 Rewinder. That was a lot of fun to make. It was a labor of love. Definitely a labor, but I mean, it was fun to try and celebrate this. I am kicking around a couple ideas for some other short documentaries. I might be reaching out to a couple people on some, for maybe some interviews. Gonna take some time off from that, though. I want to be able to, like, sit at home and be like, I feel like playing video games instead of being like, but I need to edit this. You know how it is. All right. For all of us here at BBSN Network, all right. Take two on the outro. For all of us here at BBSN, I'm Ethan Leach, and I'll see you in the next one.